What is the safe withdrawal rate for 2025? I recently saw this article and they recommended a new withdrawal rate somewhat below the 4% withdrawal rate rule that's been used for decades. They recommended 3.7%. What I'm going to do, what we do on this channel is use the returns for the last 100 years for the S&P 500. So what we want to do is project ahead. If we have these kind of returns, what that 3.7% rule might have done for you or might do for you, giving similar returns. So again, here's what we do on this channel. There's nothing else like it on YouTube. We're unique in this way. We set up spreadsheets to run different numbers. We talk about all these different concepts like sequence of returns risk, the impact of compound growth, your asset allocation, impact of inflation, Social Security. And we're looking specific at this 4% rule because somebody's recommending 3.7%. So what we want to do is go ahead and run some numbers here. Let's just say you've been able to save up that $1 million in retirement. And we're going to look at 3.7% rule. Now, I think I ran this before, and that would be like $3,100 a month, which would be $37,200 a year. So if we would use the numbers for the last 100 years, how many times would you have an issue in the last 100 years withdrawing $3,100 a month? Now, we're going to give yourself a 3% COLA here. Let's see how often you'd run out of money. Again, the question we're trying to answer is, what is safe withdrawal rate? I guess you need to define what safe is, but you use 3.72 on this $1 million, which would be $3,100 a month. You would have run out of money using the numbers for the last 100 years in these different years. 1929, you ran out of money in 14 years. 1930 in 17 years. But folks, every other scenario, look at this is a summary box using 1925 numbers. These are the returns going down through here. You'd have these kind of money after 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 years. This is the breakdown by after 10, 20, and 30 years. Only in these two scenarios, the worst case scenarios, the last 100 years, would you run out of money. Most of the time, you'd have all kinds of money left. In fact, this is the graph after 20 years. It's the only time, depression years. Every other scenario, you could take out a lot more than 3.7%. I guess what your definition of safe is, if you want to be guaranteed you're not going to run out of money, then if you stuck to the 3.7% rule. Now, one thing we haven't taken into account is giving yourself a 60-40 split, which I think they either ran it at 60-40 or 50-50 to come up with that. Well, watch what happens when we update this. Right now, we have a 97.5% success rate for 20 years and 97.2% success rate after 30 years. Let's go ahead and update this to see, doing this 60-40 split, how that might change things. Look at the numbers, folks. Using a 3.72% withdrawal rate and a 60-40 asset allocation. This is how many times you run out of money after 20 years using the numbers for the last 20 years is 0. Even 1929, 1930, they'd be getting low. In fact, if you went out just a little bit farther, I think it's 1929 numbers. You're running out of money in 24 years. 1930, you still have a little bit left after 30 years, folks. So if you're retired at age 62, you might be running out of money by age, 80, 86 or so. But again, folks, that's using the worst case scenario. That's just something that hasn't happened since, where you had 4 down years right off the bat. Then you would have an issue. But let's go ahead and look at this 3.72 because I think that's kind of low. But again, I'm not a financial advisor. But what happens if we just go up to a $4,000 a month? Again, if you're planning on retiring and you go, man, I can't afford to live on $3,100. How about if we go up to $4,000 a month on this $1 million? That'd be a 4.8% withdrawal rate, more than a percentage point more than what they were recommending, 3.7%. Well, let's go ahead and update this and see if these numbers change much. Okay, now we have a 4% failure rate, which means you have a 96.3% success rate after 20 years and a 91.5% after 30 years. That's using 100 years worth of data. That's using the returns as bad as the depression years. And only in these 2 years right here would you run out of money. And I think one other time, let's look at the graph, because I think the year 2000 is starting to kick in right here. Remember what happened in 2000? We had 3 down years and then down 37%. So, folks, that's in the worst case scenario in the last 100 years. You'd run out of money 3.7% of the time after 20 years, 8.5 after 30 years. You can see more of these after 30 years during the depression type returns. But what could you do differently? If you first retire and you start out with some down years, I call that sequence of returns risk. When these first years when you retire, you have down years, what could you change differently? Yes, you could take out less money, but what happens if after a down year, instead of giving yourself a 3% COLA, you actually do what's called giving yourself a negative COLA? In other words, 3% of the time, after you give yourself a 3% COLA in good years, but if you had down years the very next year, you'd cut that by just 2%. Let's see if these numbers change much. Right now, we're looking at a 4.8% withdrawal rate. Let's go ahead and update this, giving yourself a 3% COLA in good years, and after a down decade, you cut your COLA by 2%. It'd be a little bit painful, but let's see how that might change the numbers. See the difference? 0% of the time in the last 100 years, over a 20-year period, you would run out of money. You can see it going down through here. The yellow means it's less after 20 years than after 10 years. All these other numbers are only increasing, just only increasing. The only time you have a problem, simply by making that simple adjustment, if you first retire and have some down years, just go ahead and take a negative COLA of just 2% and look at the numbers. Only in 1929 would that have not worked. And let's see where you would actually run out of money. After 29 years, if you're 62, you can make it to 91. Even in the worst case scenario of what's happening in the last 100 years, if you hit this down decade of 1929 going forward, that's when you'd run out of money. But that's the only time, and that's only after 29 years. Let's see if we can go a little bit higher. Instead of 4.8%, let's go up to 5.04%. Again, what we're trying to do is find out, is this enough money, or is this 4,200 going to work and not run you out of money if you have $1 million? Because people say, I can't retire on 3,100. That'd be the 3.7%. What if you need 4,200? What if you need 5% withdrawal rate? Let's go ahead and update this and show you the numbers, see if these change much. Look at this, folks. Even with the 5% withdrawal rate, quite a bit above that 3.7, only in 1929, 1930, and I think probably the year 2000. I'm going to check that out here, see if we see a red one down here. No, it doesn't even get to that point. Oh, it hasn't been 30 years since 1920 or since the year 2000. That's why. So you got a 98% success rate, even with the 5% withdrawal. So I'm just using actual numbers. I'm sure they're using Monte Carlos and fictional numbers or projecting ahead. But if you use actual returns from the S&P 500 with the 60-40 asset split with a 3% COLA, and after negative years, just knock that down to a -2 or a -2 COLA, you would have money in every situation except these 2 years. Except if we had huge downturn like this, that's the only time you'd run out of money. Isn't that interesting? Now, folks, what we do on this channel, we also take into account Social Security when you start that and all that. I was just running the numbers, basically just looking at the 60-40 split and just running the numbers off the $1 million with the 4,200 and showing that 5% withdrawal rate. You don't have to keep it at 3.7% as long as you monitor what's going on those initial years. Because, folks, you don't want to end up 20 years in retirement having these kind of sums. Enjoy that. Enjoy your nest egg. That's what you worked your whole life for, to enjoy that. And it looks like in almost every case in the last 100 years, taking out 5%, as long as you did this, cut back on your COLA after negative years, it looks like you'd be fine 100% of the time after 20 years and 97.2% of the time after 30 years. The only problem years being 1929 and 1930. But folks, that's what we do on this channel. We love running numbers for people. We love setting up spreadsheets to answer some of these different questions. This video, we look at the 3.7% recommended rule, when the 4% rule has been working for decades. And we saw in this video that actually it'd be working fine with the 5% withdrawal rule. See, if you were looking for this kind of money to retire, looks like you could do it as long as you monitor. But again, that's what we do on this channel. Please consider subscribing. Please share this with others. Please let people know there's a channel out there that run all kinds of different numbers, set up spreadsheets, and look at some of these financial concepts that you need to really be aware of to see where you might be in the future. Thanks so much for watching.